Good
Beautiful.
morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And welcome, welcome to the Infinite Way, where spirituality meets humanity. My name is Dr. Enolia Foti, and it brings me great pleasure to introduce to you our guest. His name is Louis Virie Blanche, and Louis introduces himself as the Cherokee Lumbee Choctaw, Blackfoot, Afro-French Creole Gumbo Yaya guy. And this is part two of Louis being here with us to share. Hello, Louis, and how are you?
Aloha, hola, ho, hello.
We had such a wonderful conversation. I had to invite you back. It is so important because you have so much to share and so much wisdom. And I hope you don't mind being back here to have that conversation. And I would love for us to start out with just talking a little bit about Gementria, if you don't mind sharing.
Not at all. I have a very interesting story pertaining to how I became acquainted with, some call it Gematria, but I think the overall heading is Gementria, but Gematria is perhaps a facet of Gementria.
Okay,
I'm
please
not,
educate me because I am not fully embraced. I've actually seen both spellings, and actually, I was going to ask you about that. Could you define it for us and in terms of your own knowledge?
well, I was introduced to it through a series of, as you've been finding out with me, I have an abundance of what I call serendipity doodahs, these synchronicities in my life where epiphany after epiphany unfolds, and I find myself in some place with some person simply because I'm following this voice, this quiet stillness that speaks to me.
Right.
One day I was in Southern Arizona, and the voice kept saying, "Go to the bookstore. Go to the bookstore." And generally, my pattern with going to the bookstore was I would go to the bookstore if I was specifically looking for something, or if I hadn't been in a while, I would go to the bookstore and I would kind of browse the new book section. Well, I had just been to the bookstore, but the voice kept saying, "Go to the bookstore." So I heeded the call. I go to the bookstore. The store I went to in this town was Hastings. And I walked in the door, and there was a gentleman sitting at a table, and he had written these books called Remembering Who You Are. And he was right out in the middle of, I mean, 10 feet in front of the door. He wasn't like in a
Mhm.
little private room. And so I walked up and I started talking to him, and he was telling me that he had written these books, Remembering Who You Are. And he said, "Hey, I'm taking Curlian photographs. Would you like to have a photograph taken?" And I said, "Sure." He goes, "Well, sit down there and relax, and I'll take your Curlian photograph." So I sat there, he took the picture, and then he said, "Wow, man." He goes, "Where'd you go?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Man, I told you to relax, but you went somewhere." And I mean, it was just a matter of minutes. Perhaps it was one of those people have these experiences where they feel like they've been gone for several lifetimes and only a few minutes passed, you know? But he said, "Wow."
Yes.
He says, "Wow, you really went out there." He says, "Give me your name. What's your birth date?" And so I give him my name. I say, Louis Virie Blanche. I'm born November 2nd, 1951. And he goes, "Oh, wow." And he goes, "Hey, have you ever read, there is a book called The Journeys to the Far East. It's a
Mhm.
true story that it's a 6-part book by Divorce, published by the Divorce Company. And it's a true story of these people that go to places like Shangri-La. They go to Tibet, and they're on this journey. But it's a true story that documents the experiences this group of people have on this journey. And they have these interminglings with ascended masters, and they have all these very otherworldly experiences on that journey. So this gentleman Michael was his name, that had written these books called Remembering Who You Are. He said, you've got to get that set of books. And then he asked me, have you ever heard of the House of Masters? And I said, no, I haven't. He says, well, Louis, you've got a soul number 11. You've got an outer personality number 11. Your destiny number is 22. And he said, your life path number is 11. And your power, your ultimate thing to do in life is 33. He says, you've got all master numbers. And this is what he actually gave me. I've had it,
Wow.
I've had it sealed in plastic, but he called it a personal vibration code. And if you'll notice here, the letters are separated into groups of 3, except for the I and the R are in a group of 2. And each group of letters is given a numerical relationship between 1 and 9. And the way that he does his work is he separates the vowels from the consonants.
Mm-hmm.
So when he did my name, he put the vowels up top to give the soul number, which he came up with an 11. The consonants below, he came up with an 11. Now the vowels added up to 47. And you must always reduce numbers unless there's a master number. So the 47 added together equals 11. That's how I got my soul number. Then the consonants added to 38, and that adds to 11, and that's how I got my outer personality number. Then he adds those 2 together to get your destiny number, which gave me a 22. And then he asks for your date of birth. My date of birth came out to be an 11.
Wow.
And then he adds your destiny number with your date of birth, life path number, and I had a 33. Well, he told me that there was a place in Mesa, Arizona, in the greater Phoenix area,
Mm-hmm.
called the House of Masters. He asked me if I'd ever heard of the House of Masters. And I said I hadn't. And he said, I'm giving you this lady's name and number. You've got to call her. So a short while after meeting this gentleman, because the voice kept saying, go to the bookstore, go to the bookstore. I go to the bookstore and I'm introduced to this title because I called up this lady. Her name is Barbara Colgane. And I told her I had been referred to her. And she said, well, come to my house and I'd love to meet you. So she lived on Kiowa Street in Mesa, Arizona. And it's a house that looks like any other house in suburban Phoenix. And I knock on the door and she opens the door and she tells me to come in. And the foyer in the house, she asked me to take my shoes off. So I took my shoes off and she said, well, Louis, this is my home and you're welcome here. This is the House of Masters. And she said the thing I was to do was to basically make myself at home. She said, if you look through the house, every room in the house has these portraits of the masters painted by a woman named Celea Winkler.
Okay.
And Celea Winkler this lady Barbara had a very interesting experience. She was married to a gentleman and she had her Kundalini rising moment and it changed her. It changed her so much that her husband thought she'd lost her mind. In fact, she'd lost the mind she didn't need and found her higher mind. But he had her put into an insane asylum because of it.
Oh, oh, wow.
And she was hospitalized against her will And she told me that she was there and she had this voice tell her that she was supposed to go through this forgiveness process where she was supposed to forgive herself and all the people that she had had any dealings with in life. So it was like she took inventory of her life and did this forgiveness process. And she said that shortly thereafter, the director of the hospital came to her and said, Mrs. Colgate, I'm releasing you. You don't really need to be here. And she was released and she divorced her husband and she started traveling. She started going to like Tibet and she started going to Peru and going to Egypt.
Mhm.
And on these journeys, she kept meeting this couple. She kept meeting Saleha Winkler, not,
Oh, wow.
just by chance. She would be in Tibet and they'd see them and then she'd be someplace else. And this happened over a number of years. Well, that day when I first arrived at her home, she told me to make myself at home and to just go through the house and see, talk to the masters or just look at the portraits and just see what happens. So I was probably there an hour and a half or 2 hours. There were masters in the hallway, in every bedroom, in the dining room, in the living room. And as I approached each portrait of a master, and she had a very unique thing that she dawned on her in this process of meeting Saleha Winkler. She said, there must be women masters, not just male masters.
Mhm.
And so as I went through the house, the men and women masters, the ascended masters that Saleha Winkler had painted, those portraits, all sang to me. And each time they sang to me the same song. And they sang, all you need is love, la-di-da-di-da, all you need is love. And for an hour and a half or 2 hours, I'm communing with these masters and they're singing to me.
Mhm.
And I came out from that experience and Barbara was sitting in her living room and she said, Louis, you gotta have, we've got to have a talk. And my first band was called The Flow. And my first business card was pictures of pyramids with camels crossing the desert in front of the pyramids.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I showed you a song album that had the Egyptian hieroglyphics around it. The last time we were together, I showed you that Sun Song album. But she told me that she had been my mother in Egypt. And it struck all these chords in me because I'd had these little hints pertaining to Egypt. But she spoke to me of her being my mother and my having connections with Akhenaten. And she said, Louis, you've got to come back because there's lots of people I need to introduce you to. So I was introduced to Gematria and the Ascended Masters through this voice telling me to go to the bookstore. And when I went to the bookstore, I called Barbara and she became like, as she said, she had been my mother in another lifetime, but in this lifetime, she became very much a surrogate mother to me. And the next time she told me to come back, and when she called me and said, Louis, it's time to come back, I've got these people that you should meet. I came to the door, she opened the door, and I went in the foyer, and I was taking my shoes off there. And as I looked into the living room and the kitchen and the hallway, I saw people, but they all weren't completely physically materialized.
Mhm.
They were almost like energy bodies. But she had gathered all these people, and some of them were coming up to me crying, and they were saying, "We're so sorry what happened in Egypt. We're sorry, we're sorry." And then some said, "Oh, we have a message from Baba Ji," or these people were just coming up to me and they were sharing so many incredible things. And those are my first two visits to Barbara's home, which she called the House of Masters. And as we speak, I have those masters paintings. There's about 42 of them that she gathered, because when she got out of the hospital, divorced her husband, and started traveling to places like India, Tibet, and Egypt, she kept meeting the lady who was painting these portraits. And eventually that lady transitioned, and Barbara saw her husband one day and said, "Well, wow, I'm sad to hear about Saleha transitioning, but what's happening with the masters, the portraits of the masters?" And he said, "Well, someone paid me for them, but they never came to get them." And he said, "So I'm giving them to you." So that's how they ended up in her home in Mesa, Arizona. And then how they're here with me now, because I want to say, I think we're coming up on her third anniversary of her transition. During the June is the solstice. Am I right about that? The June solstice,
June
20th or
21st,
21st?
21st, yes.
Well, she transitioned on the solstice about 3 years ago. And she had stayed in Mesa, Arizona with the masters in that home for 2 or 3 decades. She'd been there a long time with them. And something led her to go to what I call the Holy Lands of Los Angelinos. She moved to North Hollywood in California, and the masters were in boxes when she moved. And eventually she said, Louis, we have to do a ceremony, and I want to take the masters out and open up this house as a temple, and you've got to come and help me do that."
Right.
So I went out and we did that. And in fact, while I was there, that white lion that I showed you,
Yes.
I was working on that a lot in the temple out there in North Hollywood. But she eventually told me that, well, she had this strange thing happen. All of a sudden, the home that she was living in, the man that she had divorced, she had children with him, and he had left properties to the children, and she was living in one of the homes in California that her ex-husband had left, and the kids lived out there. But on a very short notice, the house she was living in got sold. And so she
Mm,
had to box the masters up all over again, and she ended up back in Phoenix,
okay.
which was really a blessing because she loved Phoenix. She'd been in Phoenix area most of her for many, many years. And but she started calling me. She says, "Louis, the masters are in boxes, and the place I'm at in Phoenix is not appropriate to have them. And they're saying they want to be with you." And COVID kicked into gear. So people weren't doing a lot of traveling. She was thankfully in a place, because she lived to be about, I think, 96 or 97 years old.
Okay.
And she was, an elder living with a relative. The masters were in boxes, and she was not in any position to be traveling and bringing them to me. And I couldn't get to her.
Right.
And about a year and a half ago now, she told her granddaughter and her son and the other people, because when you went to visit the House of Masters, she always had people sign in and date her. She had a book. And as you
Mhm.
might imagine, a lot of different people from all over the world found their way to her house. And she had quite a soul family. But her son and granddaughter abided by her wishes because she kept telling people, and she had a friend that she had traveled to India and Tibet and Egypt and places like that with. They'd been on a journey together. There's a place in California called Grass Valley
Okay.
that has a lot of auspicious history or mythology to it, like the White Brotherhood. There are some people that wrote books on the masters. I think Ballard, I'm not remembering the complete name,
Okay.
but
Not
turned
familiar.
out Grass Valley was kind of like a magnet that attracted some very interesting people. Barbara had gone to Grass Valley um, in the journeys of collecting these portraits of the masters and living the life she was living. She met a lot of phenomenal people. But when she transitioned, she had told her relatives that I was supposed to be the caretaker. And they did arrange for them to come, and I have a few of them in this room, and they're in the rooms of the house I live in now. So my introduction to Gematria was a cosmic stepping stone, invisible breadcrumb that led me to the House of Masters. That this domino effect of divinity, just one divine epiphany after another happening. And Barbara was she knew me. She knew me in my soul's essence. She knew me. And she knew aspects of me that I had not been that overtly willing to embrace on my own. And I'm still curious about, so I went to Egypt in 2008.
Okay.
And there were people other people have talked to me about this Akhenaten connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some strange things. There were 33 of us that were on the tour to Egypt. And I had been given an Akashic record reading, and the woman that I got that reading from, I got it right before going to Egypt. And she told me that there was people in Egypt, things I had to do, and there were people I had to see. Because in Egypt, there's lots of places that sell oils. And have you been before?
Oh, yes, I have been before. And yes, I am very familiar with that. Yes,
But she said, not all those places that sell oil have the same quality oils.
they don't.
And she said there was a certain guy I had to meet. And she said, after your tour that you're on ends, you've got to stay and do other things. And the lady I was with at that time, she had gifted me with the Akashic record reading. And when the 33 people in the tour group left, we stayed. And that night after they left, this guy named Farouk that we were told to connect with, and the first day we got to Egypt, we had gone to the shop to get the oils that we had been told where to go to get those oils. So when the tour group left and we were there by ourselves, we contacted Farouk, and Farouk came over to the hotel about 3 a.m. Because a lot of things that happen in Egypt happen before the sun comes up.
Mm-hmm.
You might go in the pyramids in the dark and come out,
And
and
it's sun and
the
sign.
sun is out, and the sands are reflecting the sunlight, and you've just had this experience of a lifetime. And but anyway, Farouk came over to the hotel and he met me down in the lobby and we shook hands, and then he sits down and he kind of just closes his eyes. So I sit down and I close my eyes. And 10 or 15 minutes later, he goes, okay, you're good. You're good. He goes, I'm going to send a car over here in about 30 minutes. And they're going to take you to a place you're going to meet me. So after the tour group left, we had these adventures with Farouk because
Wow.
In the middle of the day in Cairo, there's like horses and camels and semi trucks and bicycles and people walking, and nobody honors any lanes. Everybody's just going for it, you know?
Yes, it's the most frightening thing you can ever experience sometimes was
But it,
when my driver actually went the wrong way down the other side of the road to get to the turn that he wanted to get to. So yes, I have experienced that.
well, you know, they kind of drive that way in Mexico City. They drive offensively. They drive and kind of dare you to hit them. They will pull in front of you to thinking you're not going to hit them because you're pulling in front of them. But at 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, there's very little traffic on the streets of
Right,
Cairo.
right.
So Farouk is sending these cars for us, and the guy's driving 90, 100 miles an hour at night, and nobody's on the road. And he pulls off and he pulls up to a palm tree and he says, "You see those two camels? Ride those due north and you'll see Farouk." So these were the kinds of things we were having arranged for us. And there was a place I was supposed to go sing, a sun connected place
Mhm.
that Farouk took me to. And we had these days with Farouk, and the tour group that had been with us before, when we would go into places, there were some people that were trying to bribe the guards to get special entrance into places that might have been blocked off.
Yeah.
And there was one woman on the tour that kept saying, "Why doesn't that Louis know who he is? And why isn't he doing this? And why isn't he doing that?" And she would sometimes say to the guards, "Here, look, my boyfriend is a really brilliant man, and here's $100. Can you open the gate there and let him go in?" And she would say things like, "He can create world peace. He's very important. Please let him go in." And the guards would kind of ignore her.
Mhm.
And she'd walk off, and then they'd look at me and say, "Come here." And they say, "You want to go in?" And they would let me in. And when we went into the Great Pyramid, you know, you're on your hands and knees.
Yes, I do.
And it's just indescribable to be there in person with something you've seen in books and movies because it's immense.
Yes.
And the doorway isn't that tall. The doorway to get in the pyramids is not a normal sized doorway.
No.
And you have no idea that you're going to be on your hands and knees
Mhm.
practically. And I had a guitar in my backpack, and if I lifted up the slightest bit, I was hitting the top of the ceiling.
Mhm.
So our group's going through, and I was basically praying. I mean, every step I took or every crawl I made, I was in prayer.
Yeah.
And then we got to, I believe we got to the King's Chamber first, and we were able to stand up. And we had our group, and we were going to do a meditation and a chant. And when we started doing that, the lady that I had been traveling with, she started screaming and having a world unto herself. I mean, she wasn't abiding by the fact that we were going to do a meditation and then sing together. It was like she was just having her own moment of moments, which is kind of strange.
Mhm.
And then we got back on our hands and knees and we went to the Queen's Chamber. And she wasn't so boisterous there, but she still something wasn't quite right. So when we went in, I think it was 4 or 5 in the morning. It was dark. The sun wasn't out. When we came out of the pyramid, the sun is shining. The sand is reflecting the sunlight. And these little children with these eyes that have so much to say are looking at you. And they're giving you this and giving you that. And I'm like holding all these things they're giving me. And they asked me, "Do you have Do you have a son? Do you have a daughter? Do you have a mom? You know, and they were, well, this is for your son. They were giving me these things, and I'm holding them as best as I can. And then they say, well, what are you going to give me?
Mm-hmm.
So I held everything as best as I could and reached in my pocket. And the first bill that came out was a $20, 20 US dollars. And the little boy just grabbed it. And he looked at me and I looked at him and and he said, thank you. And one of the first things that he had done was he put a turban on my head. Now, did this happen to you in Egypt as well?
Oh my goodness. I went to the pyramids through the local way and took a camel in. So I wasn't with a tour.
Ah,
And yeah, I had some profound experiences at the pyramid because I was by myself.
I can imagine.
And I had the opportunity to go with a local guide that I had started off at the essential oil store, of which I learned all about essential oils and how they're wood pressed and how they're prayed over and how they're put in an alabaster jar and how the water seeps out from that alabaster jar to give you the purest form. And those are the types of essential oils that you want. Those are the type of oils that you want.
Yes, indeed.
And in going through the back way in the local way, I was in the desert and I could see the pyramids in the distance and eventually made my way to the pyramids. And when I went in, there was only one other couple that was in there. And then there were people, that were making their way to the pyramid to enter in. And I went in and the couple left. And I was like, oh my goodness, nobody's here. And so there I am. I'm having my moment. I'm singing, I'm chanting, I'm having my moment. And I had my moment for like a half an hour. And I was like, this is amazing. How could nobody be here for half an hour? And when I came back out, I didn't realize that they had held everyone up so that I could have that moment.
Ah, blessings, blessings.
And what a blessing that was because they don't do that.
Right, right.
They don't do that.
Yeah,
And the local guy who was taking me to each one of the pyramids, he showed me where to sit for the most sacred vibration in the most sacred space and the blah, 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 blah. And that's where
right.
you pray. And he literally would talk to some of the others to just make sure that they weren't focused on what I was doing. And I was able to have that moment in each one of the pyramids that we visited. And I was so grateful. And it's an experience I'll never, ever, ever forget. You know, it's a vibration that is sacred. It's a feeling and a knowingness because I've actually had very much ties to Egypt also. And I think that my ties were priestess or mystic, but working with one of the queens, I really believe that that's where my ties were because that knowledge base and that feeling when I was there and the downloads. And I mean, you can't explain this to anyone. You can only just say, come with me and experience it,
Right.
which by the way, I'm going back in October. Anyone's interested, I'm leading a group to Egypt, the 10th through the 20th,
I noticed
2024,
that.
back
I
to Egypt.
noticed that. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And then, eventually I left and I doubled back with a different tour guide. And I went to the desert at night under the full moon. And I was able to stay out there 3 to 4 hours and pray. And the full moon was like right there. Like you felt like you could reach out and touch it.
Yes,
And it's
yes.
another experience being in the desert at night, you
Yeah.
know, and the silence is palpable and I
Oh,
and the sand is shimmering from the moonlight and
yeah.
the aura of the energy is so beautiful and so sense, you could sense it, you could feel it, you could feel it with every movement that you made. And it was just so sacred. So I really, really understand your story. What a beautiful story.
Well,
So,
yeah, Farouk was born there basically at the Giza Plateau.
mhm,
And he was a great person to connect with. And I was, every place we went, I had another very interesting, we took a boat to a pyramid, and again, early in the morning. And as our boat pulled up to the shore, we could hear all these cats meowing.
mhm.
And as we got off the boat and walked towards the temple, the cats were dispersing and running away. And I'm told that at night when there's no people around, the cats live in the temples. And our group went in and we did a meditation. And as we were sitting there meditating, I felt something come and sit in my lap. And when the meditation was over, all my tour mates, they got up and started wandering around the property to explore things. And there was this little kitten sitting in my lap. And I felt like I couldn't get up. I didn't want to disturb it. And I sat there for 10 or 15 more minutes. And the people with me kept coming by, wondering what I was doing. And eventually the little cat ran off. And I was wearing this rainbow scarf. And when the cat ran off, I looked down on the temple floor and I saw this spot. And there was another friend of mine standing by. And we said, what is that? And it was a baby bat. And he said, wow, it's a little baby bat. So I went outside and found a rock to lay on in the sun. And I was laying there in the sun. I had my rainbow scarf around my neck and I'm laying there and I feel something crawling. And that baby bat somehow had attached itself to me and went outside with me. So I had this cat bat experience in the, but this one other thing that was every place we went, this woman that wanted to buy or pay her way into certain areas was always trying that, and they weren't going for it. And they would call me over and have me go in and do things and show me places, like you were saying. But we went to the museum, the Cairo Museum.
Mhm.
And now I'll go back a little bit. When I came out on the sand and the little boy had given me all the gifts and wrapped a turban on my head and he'd gotten the $20 and ran off, I get on the tour bus and everybody on the bus has got a turban on their head. So I guess everybody had their moment
Had their moment, yes,
with one of
yes.
those children whose eyes call to you, like, you see those children around the world. I mean, they're like that in Mexico and places, but it was so funny. I step on the bus and everyone's got a turban on their head. But when we went to the Cairo Museum, the lady that had after the day at the pyramids, the people that were in the tour with me, they kept coming over to me going, there's something's going on with her. We don't know what it is, but that was strange. And I said, yes, it was, but I don't have any explanation for it. Although she was, how can I put it? She was that kind of person that
Mhm.
you might be doing a fire ceremony and the next thing you know, she might have her clothes off and she might be wallowing in the sand. Or she might start, in fact, I met a lady at the home of one of the gentlemen that went to Egypt with me. He was having a seminar at his home. And this lady had done these fantastic pieces of art. And I called this other lady friend of mine. I said, you got to come and meet this lady with this art. And when they got together, they started talking light language together.
Mm-hmm.
So this lady was not just your normal kind of person,
Mm-hmm.
to say the least. And
Yes, yes.
and when we went in the Cairo Museum, the guards were picking up on her energy because they were trailing us. And our tour guide, what did they say? Halibaba? Halibaba?
Mm-hmm.
They say in Egypt, Halibaba. And our tour guide was a great guy. He was, um, the government pretty much trains them to tell them what they can say and what they can't
What
say.
they can't say, exactly. Yes.
And when we were in the Cairo Museum, he was showing us everything. And we get to the back, and there's Akhenaten. And I raised my hand and I said, well, what do you have to share with us about Akhenaten? And he was kind of silent for quite a bit, like a really elongated moment of silence. And then he said, he was a prophet. And then he kind of didn't want to say much more. And he said, you know how you're wearing your hair there? That has a significance. And but it was like Akhenaten's reign, the story with Akhenaten,
Yes, I do.
giving the women being given more credibility,
Everything. Yes.
art, monotheism. In fact, Manly P. Hall, Manly P. Hall's works.
Yes.
He has a book called, I think, The 12 Masters.
I've read it.
Akhenaten is first in that book by Manly P. Hall. And Buddha's there and Christ and others. But so I had met Dr. Flanagan in the 70s, but I didn't get to Egypt until 2008. But I was meant to be there when I was meant to be there.
Exactly. So you've shared this beautiful, beautiful story, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but a few things, which is that, it's funny how spirit calls us to do something that we're not aware of, but others are. And your beautiful encounter with your surrogate mother, she called you to take your place among the masters. And in as much as you're calling it a story, it was just your story to be called home. And it's amazing because I had kind of like a similar experience in Peru, where a beautiful individual that we care about very much shares with us what we're going to do. And sometimes we're just, you look at them in like puzzlement, going, who are you talking about, me? Because where you're at the moment, it's just not a thought.
Mhm.
But as you traverse life and as you move and navigate the way that is just divinely aligned, because you are on the path whether you know it or not, and all things align and everything comes to fruition, it's just a beautiful moment. And it sounds like you had that in taking your place among the masters, which is why that light that you are, that energy being that you are, shines so brightly no matter where you go.
Mm.
And then it's received. So it's received here, it's received in Egypt. And, we take for granted, especially when we're on tours, oh, they're the people, they're just the workers and everything, but they are among the most sacred spaces day in and day out.
Mhm.
And energetically, they see way more than we give them credit for. And they know. And what a blessing it is to be seen. as the light that you are, which is why you were engaged the way you were. I mean, I have to go back to when I first met you and I was like, okay, who is that? I want to know who that is. I want
Hmm.
to meet that person. And we don't realize it. We don't see ourselves the way others see us,
Yeah.
but there, it's there in its fullness and it's beautiful to see.
Well, I say divine dittos because I had that same feeling with you. Because I had a little 15-minute session with someone that day, and I
Yeah.
came back and Priscilla and you and David, and I think the gentleman Paul, but you were gathered there kind of waiting. Because I'd been thinking I had seen you and wanted to connect more. And David was the whole reason that I had connected with Priscilla's Mystic Minds Network in the first place. And I keep calling them cosmic stepping stones and invisible breadcrumbs, but because I think it's pertinent to share my beloved surrogate mother, Barbara. One of the things she was saying to me when she kept saying the masters have to come to be with you, she started talking to me about Peru. And I'll have to show you a picture. I was at a 2012 gathering. I met a very pivotal Mayan elder at that gathering, and Alberto Vidoldo. Do you know Alberto's work?
Yes, I do. I know Alberto Violdo and I studied with his group. Yes. And I know Marcela Lobos. Yes.
Wow. Wow.
All
That
of
makes
them.
sense. That makes sense. Well, I'm at this gathering in San Francisco at Fort Baker, which is near the Golden Gate area. And Alberto's doing this presentation. And there's 1,000 people or more in this room. And he had us during the presentation, he had us do a little meditation, and he had us envision the world as we choose it to be. And then when the meditation was over, he finished his presentation and he was getting off the stage and everyone was running up to him and they wanted to talk to him. And he makes his way, he comes down and around and he comes up to me
Hmm.
and he says, "See that woman over there? That's my assistant." He goes, "You've got to get in touch with her." So at that gathering, I had seen across the room, there was a gentleman wearing this crystal. It's like, I have a picture of it, but imagine crystals longer than my finger. And I think there's 7 of them. They have a big blue stone in the middle.
Hmm.
Then the part that you would wear around your neck has crystals going up, like rope woven together with material. And this gentleman, I saw this crystal from across the room and I went over and I said, "Wow, that is incredible." And he says, "Well, this is what you're supposed to take to Peru with you." And he gives it to me.
Hmm.
Now I've had some series of events. I no longer have that crystal. It's still in existence. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get it back, but that's neither here nor there. But Barbara kept talking to me about Peru. And then there's a place not far from here in Georgia called Delphi University.
Yeah.
There's a man from Brazil called the Man of Light. And my partner had had this dream about a man whose hands were emanating light. And we went to a William Henry, I think it was a William Henry presentation on Pallas Athena. There's a connection
Hmm.
between Nashville and the Pallas Athena in Greece. But there was someone there, and my friend was talking about this dream she had of the man with the man of light. And this woman said, "The man of light is affiliated with the Delphi University in Georgia." And then, all these little connections, like her grandparents lived in this town in Georgia where Delphi University is.
Wow.
She didn't know that at the time, but we had to go there and see the Delphi University. And the man of light was this healer from Brazil that had met people, and they were inspired to put this Delphi University together because he was doing a lot of great healing work and he was teaching people how to do this. And they were having, I don't know since COVID if they continued it, but they were having the first of every month, first Friday of every month, they would have these free healing sessions where people come and there's a bunch of healers in a room and people write their name and something they want to deal with on a card, and you get called into the room one by one and you get a time with a healer. And one of the healers there said, Louis, you've got to go to Peru. And they said, you've got to go and you've got to go. You got to stay longer. You got to maybe stay 2 or 3 weeks. So Barbara told me about Peru. This person at Delphi told me about Peru. And the person with this crystal had told me about Peru. And the other day, I listened to you and David having your conversation, and both of you were talking about Peru. But then Alberto Valdoldo and his partner, I mean, my goodness.
I actually went to Peru with Alberto my first time and received the 13 rites of the Munaki with the Quiros Indians. And it was such a phenomenal experience that I ended up doubling back, and I've gone like 3 or 4 times. My goddaughter is in Peru, one of the Quiros daughters. I've had the time to spend time with the Quiros in the Andes, in their village, spending the night there. And it's profound. It's profound how there's so many different sacred sites. And that was the experience being in the village of the Quiros that I had with one of the Quiros Indians who basically told me what I was going to be doing before I was doing it. She saw in me Danya Bernardina, who's passed away since the time that I've seen her, but shared with me what I was going to be doing before I was doing it. And the sacred sites across the board, we had the opportunity not only to go to each one of the sacred sites, but do despacho ceremony with the Quiros at each one of the sites and learn and experience and have these incredible moments with them. Every location. It's something to cherish. These are life-changing experiences. I call them leap of orbits, when your life goes up a new octave because what you've experienced is so profound that you're just a different person when you complete it. So yes, very much so.
Well, Peru is calling, and whether or not that crystal returns to me and I'm able to go with that particular crystal or not, it's still calling. I'm
It's beautiful, and hopefully
gonna
you get
send
a
you
chance
a
to
picture
also
of it.
experience Lake Titicaca too, if you get a chance to actually take that journey on the Peru side and or on the Bolivia side. Either one, it's phenomenal. And Temple of the Moon, Temple of the Sun,
Yeah.
just beautiful, beautiful experiences there. But Peru is very sacred,
Yeah,
very, very.
Barbara kept telling me, she says, Louis, I'm reading this book, and she'd been there, and I got the book that she told me about when I was reading about the connection with the sun, and it's definitely calling to me, definitely. And
Yeah.
hopefully I haven't burned any bridges with Alberto, because that day when he came up to me, so much happened. I ended up going to Mexico
Mhm.
with some Mayan and Aztec elders. And actually, one of the people, Tata Eric Gonzalez, that I had met at that same gathering, he's got a place in Guatemala on Lake Atitlan. And we connected with Tata Eric, and he brought us down to Guatemala. And right after Guatemala, well, when I was with Tata Eric in San Francisco, we did a fire ceremony, and he asked me to assist with, we were doing at the Women's Center in a building, actually. And there were these purple chairs, and he said, Louis, I want you to arrange the room. And so I got this idea that I would go down to the florist in San Francisco, and I got all the donations of all these flowers. And I set up this beautiful pattern in the room, and the elders were there. And I was asking that some of the elders of Mayan elders that were there, I said, you know, where in Mexico would you suggest I go to if I want to do musical ceremonies and things? And they said, well, everyone talks about Chichen Itza, but they said there's a place called Malinalco.
Mm.
So the Mayan elders told me about Malinalco. And then another gentleman, he's an Aztec Mayan calendar specialist named Mazatzin. Have you met Mazatzin?
No, I haven't.
Because I went to a gathering, Chief Golden Light Eagle from the Lakota family, Chief Golden Light Eagle. He would have these star gatherings.
I've heard about them.
He had one at the Four Corners in 2010. And I had just moved from the Bay Area out to near Sedona. And the woman that I had been traveling with, that I went to Egypt with, and we went to Glastonbury and other places, and traveled with Norma Milanovic, who wrote We the Arturians.
Mm-hmm.
Right before the 2008 financial fiasco happened,
Right.
Norma has these journeys where she doesn't tell you where you're going, but she tells you when you're going. And if you agree to go, then she tells you where you're going to be going and what's going to be happening. And I followed my Egyptian journey to connecting with Norma to travel with her. And we met at the Isle of Man.
Mm.
Turns out the Isle of Man is on a ley line with the pyramids in Egypt. And Norma was getting guidance from Kuthumi, saying that we had to go to these financial capitals in Europe and do energy work. And then shortly thereafter, the financial fiasco with the mortgage banks and everything happened. But I'm in the Four Corners with, I didn't really want to go to the Four Corners, but the friends I was living with said, hey, Louis, are you going? We're driving up there. You can ride with us. And then a musician friend called me and said, Louis, I got a hotel for you up at the Four Corners. You coming? And the woman that had originally told me to go, I was trying to get some distance between us. And I wasn't so adamant about going when she had said to go, but then everybody else I was meeting was going. So I go, and it was beautiful because I had been working with like Dr. Flanagan and Buckminster Fuller. And these are like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men that are very advanced, but it's interesting when you see people of color, and not just people of color, but women of color, women from different traditions that have they're like wisdom keepers, it's like living libraries of
That's
information
right.
pertaining to mathematics and sacred geometry and just the energetics of cosmology. So when
Mm-hmm.
I was there, the Star Family gatherings, they were all speaking about the things that I had heard Dr. Flanagan talk about and Buckminster Fuller's work. And so, but this Mayan elder had told me about Malinalco in San Francisco, and I'm in the Four Corners. That morning, we were getting ready to leave, and the people I had driven with, we were going to go to Turtle Rock after the trip to the Four Corners.
Mm-hmm.
And the other people were mentioning the Cave of the Old Man. And the elder women came up to me that morning and they said, are you going to the Cave of the Old Man? And they're looking not just at me, but into me. They're trying to reach me and say, you've got to go to the Cave of the Old Man. So I get my breakfast, I'm on the way, and then the man who happened to be the husband of the woman who had given me my first Akashic record reading, he was there with some people from Europe. And he said, "Are you going to the Cave of the Old Man?" And I said, "Where is this cave?" And another friend, she had been given some cards, tarot cards, and she spread them out on the table. She said, "Louis, pick a card." I picked a card and she said, "Wow, you see all these circles and gold around the circle here, and you're there in the middle." She said something about, "You're going to be very influential in bringing together the tribes, and there's some work you've got to do." And so I asked the gentleman, I said, "Where is the Cave of the Old Man?" Well, it turned out the Cave of the Old Man was in the same area as Turtle Rock where we were going. And
Ah,
I was being pulled. I said, "I've got to go to Turtle Rock because my people, my ride, that's where we've already planned to go. I don't know if I can make it to the Cave of the Old Man." So we leave in a procession of about 30 cars. We're all together. We make a stop to get supplies. And then the next thing I know, some of the people aren't in the procession anymore. We get to the Turtle Rock and we're waiting for everyone to show up, but they don't show up. So we go to the Cave of the Old Man and we do ceremony in there. And it's a place that lots of years of eons of ceremony has been done there. And we finished the ceremony and went back to the home near the Turtle Rock. And then the people that had lost their way found their way to Turtle Rock. So only
mm,
certain ones of us were meant to be at the Cave of the Old Man, obviously. So I'm there with the owner of the house, and she's asking me where I want to sleep. And I say, "I want to sleep outside." So she takes me out to a patio. She says, "Well, this patio is out here, and you might like this." And so I'm there, I'm looking up in the sky, and I see these lights moving. Then I see more lights, more lights. And I say to her, I said, look at this activity here in the sky." And that morning or that evening, we didn't sleep. There was so much activity in the sky that night that we stayed up all night long until the sun came up. And the first thing that morning, after staying up all night watching the sky talk to us, we go downstairs and I meet Mazatzin. And I'm talking to him and he says, "Hey, man, I'm getting ready to go to Mexico. I'm going to do this day out of time ceremony." And I said, "Well, where does that go?" And he goes, "Well, it goes through Teotihuacan,
mhm,
places like Tepoztlan." Then he mentions Malinalco. And the Mayan elders in the Bay Area told me about Malinalco. And the elders at the Four Corners had also told me that they saw me going to Mexico. And when I see Mazatzin and he's mentioning Malinalco again, I said, "My goodness, can I come with you?" And he said, "Sure." So he he was going, I think it's July 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, and 29th are the 5 days. Now they call it the Zenith procession, but the sun goes through this progression.
mhm.
And he has been doing this for maybe 20 years. And he says it's fine for me to come with him. So he says, "Meet me at Teotihuacan and we'll start the journey." So
Right.
I go to Teotihuacan and there's this Toltec chief. They call him Gorilla. He's a big man. And he says, "Louis, you're carrying the flag." So he gives me the flag to carry for his Toltec tribe. And we make our way through Teotihuacan. We get into the area, and the guards are asking Mazatzin, what are you doing? You can't do ceremony here. You can't come in here like this." And they're standing over to the side, and Mazatzin says, "Hey, I've got permission. I've been doing this for 20 years." And they're so busy with Mazatzin that Chief Gorilla and the rest of our group, we go to the pyramids at Teotihuacan. We do our ceremonies. And when we leave, they're still talking to Mazatzin. And we go to Xochicalco. Xochicalco is a cave
Uh-huh.
and the sun comes across, and there's a hole in the cave that only for a very short amount of time is the sun coming through that area.
Is it a cenote? What they call a cenote?
It's not quite like a cenote, but it is, you might say. There's no
Okay.
water there, but I think at one time there had been water there. Because
Okay.
I just told some friends of mine about the Cozumel, the Yucatan area. There's lots of cenotes there,
Mm-hmm.
and they're phenomenal. As a child, I had all these dreams about cenotes.
Phenomenal.
So I go to Tepoztlan, Xochicalco, to, um, Teotihuacan, Tepoztlan, Xochicalco, Malinalco, and Chalma
Wow. Okay.
for this Day Out of the Time ceremony. But at Teotihuacan, Gorilla has me carrying the flag. The next day, we're at the Zocalo in Mexico City,
Mm-hmm.
and there's thousands of tribal people with regalia, drummers, all gathered in the Zocalo, because the Zocalo in a lot of the towns in Mexico were once indigenous sacred sites that the church has now built churches right on top of the sacred indigenous land.
Right.
In the Zocalo in Mexico City, there I was with all these tribal people and these drummers and dancers, and I'd never done this before, at least not to my memory. and and in Teotihuacan, Gorilla said, Louis, I can't go on the other days of the ceremony, so you've got to carry this flag through the other days for me. So the second site was in the Zocalo in Mexico City with all thousands of these brothers and sisters doing ceremony. And then I go to Xochicalco in the inside the earth. And then I finally make my way to this place that I'd heard about before called Malinalco. Malinalco has a temple of the jaguar. It was a finishing school for women. And it's called the land of the white butterfly. It's got known for big, beautiful white butterflies.
Mm.
So I go through these days of ceremony with Mazatzin and the Aztec and Mayan people, and Chalma, we ended in Chalma on the 29th of July. And I had an airlines ticket. I had to be back in Phoenix on the 31st. But I didn't really want to fly back. I wanted to stay. And I called the airlines and they said, well, if you stay, you lose your ticket. So, so I
Yeah.
had to go back to Phoenix. So I go back to Phoenix on the 31st of July. And a man I had met at the Four Corners, I'd seen him at the Four Corners. He saw the lady that I had been with in Egypt, and he had been shown my drawings. I sent some of those drawings to you of
Yeah.
Kachina, Katrina, and the different characters.
Yeah.
And he wanted to do this big production with those characters, and they said, look, we want you to record this song, People Get Ready by Curtis Mayfield. And I said, well, I happen to have a recording of that song. I already did that song. And they said, well, no, 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 we really want you to do it again. And I said, well, look, I said, on these, I'll do it if I can own the master recording when I finish doing the recording. You can use it for the show that you want to do, but I want to be own the master when it's finished. So we go over to this gentleman's house, and he's got a band called, I think it's X115. It's this ET related chemical formula that allows gravitation to be defied. And he, his wife, and his son have a band, and they have a actual ET robot character sitting behind the drums when they play.
Okay.
But he's the guy engineering this song for me. And I do the song, People Get Ready. And it's August 3rd, I think. and Mexico's calling to me. So August 5th, I get on a bus. I had very little cash. I was barely able to get a bus ticket because I think I did borrow some money from my musician friend that had gotten the hotel room for me in the Four Corners. He gave
Mhm.
me some money. When I get to Mexico City, I really don't know anyone. I really don't speak Spanish that well. And I had some phone numbers, but none of the phone numbers were working because the phones in Mexico, if you're calling a landline or calling a cell number, there's different combinations of numbers. And I was getting people asking if they could help me make calls. And finally, I was able to connect with one of the dancers I had met at the Day Out of Time ceremony. And she told me to go to these people in Mexico City and then make my way back to Chalma, and which I did. Now, I went to Mexico. I rode 35 hours on a bus to get back to Mexico.
Wow.
I landed there with $20 in my pocket, not really knowing why I was there or what I was doing. I had my backpack, my laptop, I brought these tuning forks that I had a set of tuning forks that I just brought by intuition. And I ended up being in Mexico from 2010 to 2014.
Wow. Okay. Talk
And
about following your heart and your calling.
indeed. And one of the gentlemen I had met on the Day Out of Time ceremony in a town called Tepoztlan, he had made this ancient herbal drink that the warriors would drink. And I had met him that day in Tepoztlan. But that day in Tepoztlan, there was a little taco stand on the corner, and the lady made blue tortillas and blue taco shells and things, and it was looked like wonderful food. So I told the dancers, Mazatzin, I said, we should go up there and eat. So we went there to eat, and she was taking our order, and she spoke pretty good English. And I said, well, wow, your English is great. Where'd you learn to speak English? She goes, well, I just came from Burlingame, California. And I said, wow, I was just in Burlingame, California. The lady I went to Egypt with, she was living in Burlingame, California. And when I got to Burlingame, they were doing their 100th anniversary celebration, and they were doing a play, and they needed someone to play a native person in the play. And I played that person. Now I'm in Tepoztlan, Mexico, and the lady in Tepoztlan is from Burlingame. And, these things are happening. And I told the dancers about eating there, so we went there to eat, and she gave us her number and name and everything, and we left. And normally, Mazad had a place where he normally stayed when he did the Day Out of Time in each of these cities, but this contact in Tepoztlan wasn't there. So we had like 2 rented cars, and sometimes people were taking cabs because there was quite a group of us. And we were kind of stranded that night. And I saw a place that had the lights on, and I said, let's pull over here. And it was a little cafe, and they had music and food, and we were dancing and eating. And it dawned on me, I said, Mazadzin, the lady that we met earlier today, she gave me her name and number, and she mentioned that she had just built a house. And we called her, and she said, I'm not even living in my house. The house is built at the foot of the pyramid in Tepoztlan. You're welcome to stay there. So we stayed there that night, and this house, that every room in the house was a different sacred geometric shape and color. And we stayed there that night, and it was like just the blessing that materialized. Now, when I returned in 2010 after the ceremonies, I went back to these places like Tepoztlan, and I lived in Malinalco, I lived in Chalma. And when I went to Xochicalco, the cave where the sun comes through for just a few minutes, I was there, the first time I was there were so many lines of people, they were just rushing people in and out. Well, the second time I was there, the guards inside said, "Hey, you stand over here, just stand over here." So I said, "Okay." And it turned out that they were positioning me to be in the cave when the sun came right through that zone. And that they moved me over and they said, "You stand here now." So my travels in Mexico for 4 years, when I got there that first day, I had $20 in my pocket. And I had been to this town on a weekend, and it was very boisterous during the weekends, but it was very dead in the middle of the week. And I'm talking to the gentleman that made this ancient Mayan warrior drink, and I hear music coming down the street, music by a musician named Taj Mahal.
I know them well.
Well, Taj Mahal was when he gave me my first publishing contracts.
Nice.
I had written Taj and Patti Smith. Patti Smith is like a queen of punk, kind of a poetry princess, and Taj is ethnic blues and world
Mhm.
music. And Taj and Patti had contacted me in April of 77. They both contacted me in about the same week. And this is before I did my journey to Jamaica to do that One Love thing that I told you about.
Right,
But I'm in
right.
the coat salon and I'm hearing Taj Mahal music coming down the street. And I told the Mayan drink guy, I said, I gotta go follow this music. I know this, I know Taj. So I go down in this place called Mojitos. This woman has this little place. She's playing music by Taj Mahal. I say, "Wow, I love Taj." And she says, "Well, come on in." And the music finishes playing, and she sees that I have a guitar I'm carrying. She goes, "Sing me a song." And so I play a song for her. And I ask her if I can use her phone. And she says, "Sure." So I had a number for someone because I just had numbers and names. Many of these people I didn't know. I was just kind
Uh-huh.
of getting these calls out of the blue. And I had to call this guy named Esteban from Spain, who is living outside of Tepoztlan. And when I called him, he said, "Well, it's monsoon season. You can't get out here now. The roads are washed out." He goes, "You're going to have to wait." So I didn't know where I was going to stay. The woman who was playing the music by Tosh says, "Well, you can stay at my place for a few days if you'd like." So I'm there. And for about 3 or 4 days, I'm writing and recording. Like the first night, like usually if I wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and I write till 5 or 6 in the morning and I live my day. But the writings those 3 or 4 days weren't stopping. And I was writing constantly and I was recording in my digital recorder constantly. And I ended up having 3 or 4 days of this download. And when it finished, when all was said and done, I looked back on what it was that was coming through me. And it was describing the day before creation came into being. It was like the day before time began. It's how I described it to myself. So when I called Esteban, the monsoons had been happening, and when he said to wait a few days, and he said, "Finally, you can come out." He said, "Go down to the river. You'll see this tree, cross the river, and you'll see my home." Well, he didn't tell me that the river didn't have a bridge to cross by. So I had oftentimes taking my socks and shoes off, rolling my pants up, and walking across the river. I walk across the river to Esteban's house. I've got some fruit and he's got yogurt and we're making something to eat. And we start talking. And I tell him about working with Dr. Flanagan and, my Sun Song album. And he goes, "Wow, there's a guy you got to meet then." So he calls up this guy and he says, "Man, my friend wants to meet you. You got to go over and see him right now." So he gets me on the back of his little motorcycle and I drive up to this town called Amatlan. And I had been in Amatlan before because I was doing these recordings of people that had otherworldly experiences with a friend, a lady named Azucena had said, "Louis, come to Mexico and help me document these people's experiences. So I had been to Amitlan before. So I go back to Amitlan again, and I'm at this palapa that's like a TP-shaped building. And the gentleman opens the door and he looks at me and goes, "Wow, they told me you were coming." He says, "Come on in and sit down." And I sit down and he's got this grease board on the wall, all these formulas and things. Have I shared this with you before?
No.
Well, I'm sitting there and I just had these days, 3 or 4 days of downloads that I summarized as describing the day before time came into existence. So I asked this guy, his name is Ventutet, I asked him, "What are these symbols on your grease board about?" He goes, "Oh, that's my description of existence before time became known." And I said, "Wow," I said, I just been going through this very, I call them dream streams of poetic consciousness. I said, I just got 3 or 4 downloads of this information. Now I'm going to jump back a little bit. The first day I stayed at this lady's home, I had $20 in my pocket. We went downtown and we're walking down the sidewalk, and $100 bill floats up to my feet. So I'm having these moments after moments. And this gentleman, Ventutet, he had been this brilliant little boy at 5, 6, 7 years old who ended up working with the gentleman that invented the Moog synthesizer.
Okay.
And I'm still in touch with him. I just talked to Ventutet like last week. But he had this board pertaining to the day before time came into existence. And I had that download for 3 or 4 days. So I went back to Esteban's house that night and stayed with him. But I went back the next day and connected with Ventutet. And I think I slept on his floor for about 3 months.
Wow.
And we had all these conversations about energy and cosmology and spirituality. And it was just, and then my time in Mexico, by word of mouth, I was getting all these sacred sound sessions. I didn't really know anyone. I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd ridden on the bus 35 hours to get there, but yet I was ending up with the right people in the right places, and I was, as you said earlier, I was really being received. People were having phenomenal experiences. I have tuning forks, and I do a session that takes about an hour, and I start with from the soles of the feet and work my way up to the crown chakra, and I do every finger, and then I do prayers before, during, and after, and I had some pretty phenomenal experiences where some of the people there, I would finish my sessions and kind of gently touch them and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And they'd say, "Oh, I'm fine." I'd say, "Well, what did you experience?" And one gentleman, for the whole time I was doing sessions, he was doing mudras. He was doing his positions with his hands. And I asked him when I finished the session, I asked him what he remembered. And he didn't remember doing that. And he didn't know what a mudra was. But he ended up being very pivotal. He invited me to his home. And by my going to his home, I met another gentleman named Juan, who had connections with all these very beautiful, powerful people and places throughout Mexico. And he introduced me to a lady named Victoria. And like one thing led to another. Like the next thing I knew, I was getting sessions all over Mexico. And I miss it tremendously. I had, because it was interesting when I left on the 5th of August, I was leaving on a bus, leaving Phoenix, Arizona. And there was a sheriff in Phoenix, Sheriff Arapayo, I think is his name. he had just enacted a
Mhm.
law in Phoenix that if police or the Border Patrol thought you were questionable, they could pull you over. And if you were, say, jogging with your children and you didn't have an ID on you, they could hold you, they could arrest you.
Right. I
And
heard about that law.
when I got on the bus in Phoenix and rode 35 hours, there was a couple with two children they were on the bus with me. And they had been living in Phoenix for over 10 years. He had a garage and she ran a parts store. And they were leaving because they were afraid that that law would cause them, if they were walking with their children and didn't have their ID, they could be separated and lots of things could happen. But they were returning to Mexico. And they told me his idea was he was going to go back to his village. He was going to open a garage, and all the people that worked for him were going to be part owners of the garage. And his wife had expertise in ordering parts, and they were going to bring this back to their village. Like normally in Mexico, a lot of people that go to Canada or Europe or the US, they wire money back to family members in Mexico.
That's good. Yeah.
And actually, they said the Western Union makes more money on Hispanic people wiring money than any other culture. But
Wow.
you can start a little internet cafe with one computer, or a little juice bar with a couple of juice, makers.
Yeah.
People that have relatives living in other places oftentimes are doing things for their loved ones and friends and family members that they would not have any other means of doing. It's like an uplifting process. So I told this gentleman and his wife and his children, I said, it's a beautiful thing that you are moving back to Mexico and look at what you're going to do for your village. You've got all this expertise and you're going to be sharing the blessings of what you've learned. And, I love Mexico and the people. They were so welcoming to me and very, very pious people. Like all the villages,
Yeah.
though they might practice Catholicism, they're still doing the Mayan and Aztec, the indigenous cultural ceremonies are still a part of their lives. And
Which is
it's,
beautiful.
yes.
It's really, really beautiful. What an amazing story, because really what you're sharing and what our audience needs to know is that you're sharing what it's like to live in divine alignment. When you can trust so fully what life has to bring you, and you trust your intuition and you act on your intuition, and you don't put the full-blown worry of, okay, I don't have enough, how am I going to eat, how am I going to this, how am I going to do that, and allow that to stop you from where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. And I love listening to the stories, because each and every one of those moments and everything is the divine alignment, is how we're supposed to be living our lives if we really listen to how we're called, because so many people ignore the calling and ignore where they're supposed to be and when they're supposed to be, because they're so worried about how they're supposed to be. And I think that there's a lesson to be learned in listening to these stories and understanding that when you're so fully into your heart, that the provisions take place and the people open their hearts and the engagement takes place and happens. And that's what it's like, because for me, I live from my heart when I went across Africa. And that experience that you had in Mexico was like what I had visiting and meeting people all across Africa. And it's a beautiful thing to experience. And people really genuinely care. And they take care of you. They open
Yeah.
their hearts, they open their homes, and they share and they engage, and they fully share what it is, what humanity is supposed to be.
Well, I felt
So,
so blessed. I feel blessed in your wisdom and your knowing this from an empirical, these experience firsthand. And
I do.
I may have shared little tidbits of these stories here and there with friends and some family members, but not really, like all my family members don't know these details, and all my friends have not heard all these stories as they've come together and what they exemplify in terms of exactly how you're describing it. And even for me, it's like a process where I've lived this way so long. I can't deny that. I've lived this way so long. I went to Jamaica at a time when it was very violent. When I went to Mexico, there are beheadings in every city you could think of. In fact, I was invited to Monterrey, California, Monterrey, Mexico, actually. Monterrey, Mexico, and Juarez, Mexico were vying for the most beheadings. The
Yes, and the
drug,
most violent. Mhm.
drug cartels.
Yes.
My friends that I met through Victoria, the man that did the mudras connected me with Juan, who connected me with Victoria, who lived in Guadalajara, and she connected me with others, and they took me to Monterey. And I'm doing sound sessions in Monterey from 8 in the morning to 5 in the evening. And then they would leave me in my little apartment, and I would go out walking the streets at night. When they found out I was walking the streets at night, they said, "No, no, no, we don't do that. We used to do that. We don't do that anymore." And when I was in Jamaica, there were places where I would want to go, and the cabs would say, "No, man, we don't go there, man. You walk on your own." But there is a blessedness, I think, from a religious perspective. It's called divine providence, and you're calling it divine alignment, and I agree wholeheartedly. And there's nothing like knowing that life is accommodating your every thought, almost your every wish, even before you can finish saying a prayer, it's almost answered.
Exactly.
And you don't even have to, I mean, there is a saying, ask and ye shall receive, but there is something about living. Like last night, I think I woke up in the middle of the night and I wrote, was it surrendered in innocence? No, the words came to me by means of the sincerity of innocent surrender. The word sincerity of innocent surrender. And then I added to that, by means of the sincerity of innocent surrender, we surrender in submission to serving Creator's Creator in all creation. In reception of the
Mm.
divinity of inspiration, fractal flowing within the ancient futuristic inner knowingness, glowing within the quiet stillness, known to the shimmering crystallinity, reverie dancing enchantedly on the golden liquid love light whispers of eternity, by means of the sincerity of innocent surrender. So that's something that's been, thankfully, I probably could be thankful. I won't say blame it on my grandmother and my mother or my father, but the elders that I was raised by instilled that in me. My people said my father had a heart as big as the sky, and he was so loving and empathetic and compassionate to people, children, animals, anyone, and he was a person that loved, you could be from anywhere and he would just open his heart to you. In fact, he was driving down the freeway and he saw a car with the hood up, and there was a man, his wife, and a little boy, and their car is broken down. So he turned around, he went back to them and he said, "What's happening?" And he goes, "Well, we got car trouble." And my dad could fix anything. He was the kind of guy, like, he would take it apart in such a manner as to be able to put it back together again.
Heather.
Even if he didn't fix it, we would explore it to see. So he couldn't fix these people's car, but he brought them home to my mother and I. And it was this man, his wife, and this little boy. And he said, like, my dad could bring home 3 football teams at 4 in the morning, and somehow my mom find food for everybody.
Right,
She
right,
never said, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. What are you bringing these people over here for?
right.
She never said that. But he brought this couple over. My mother fixed them something to eat. And by the time they'd finished eating, my father came back and he said, look, I've got you a job. I've got you a place to live, and you've got a car to use. He says, the place you're living is not far from here. You're going to be working at the car dealership, so they're going to give you a car to use while you're working. And he goes, and while you're here, I'll help you fix your car and we'll figure out what's going on. But that was
Wow.
just the kind of person my father was, And
Yes,
when you're traveling and spirit's leading you, and it's orchestrating all the things you need to have happen at the right time to have them happen.
exactly.
There's nothing like it, like how you and I met, how I met Brother David. And I thank you, thank you, thank you for tolerating the time it takes to weave my way through these.
Oh, it's not a toleration, none whatsoever. I would love for you to if any last words that you want to say. We could do a whole nother time in terms of the poetry that you come up with, because I think you're the only disciplined person I've ever met that's able to capture their thoughts immediately as they're coming through, as those downloads come, because the eloquence of your words are just phenomenal in writing, in engaging, in speaking, everything. So if you want to leave our audience with any thoughts or anything from your heart, well, I would welcome it.
Well, I'll try and make it short. I spoke with you before about the fire I had. And then the
Yeah.
fire I had, my roommates, their things didn't burn. They had things that were water damaged and smoke damaged. But I had had a dream of a book. And when my roommates and I moved to the new house we moved into, I saw in a pile of garbage this book called Seth Speaks by Jane Roberts. And it was in this garbage pile. I ran over to it because I'd seen that book in my dreams. And
Okay.
Seth, the title of that book deals with the validity of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And that book came to me in a dream, and the book made so much connected with me so deeply that it inspired a poem that I wrote at that time called Self-Portrait. Energy
Okay.
follows thought. And it's from the sound poetry composition called Skylight Crawl Out, Radio Magic Down to Me.
Okay.
There's an energy, an essence, a love unknown to earth, a reflection of someone unseen, reaching in our direction, translating dreams into future realities, like some new language without past, present, or future time, for the magic of the moment, time and time again, tracing sweet inspiration. I sleep in other beds of reality, waking rich with hidden treasure. My soul springs into songs I never knew, jumping in heart first, hypnotized by the flow, building pyramids of prayer, deep in nighttime energy, without an image to wear. I look in empty spaces, listening to the silence, refreshing myself anew, holding on to the trance from the inside out, understanding the magic of music between us, and living realities where all that is good.
Phenomenal.
So
Thank you
I'm
so
so
much.
I'm so thankful that the journey of my heart has deeply seasoned my soul to the point where, whether it's last night, since the sincerity of innocent surrender whether I say that in 1,000, or whether it comes to me in 1,000 different ways, that voice of quiet stillness that I named, I call them dream streams of poetic consciousness. I'm thankful to be able to hear and receive these blessings and to do whatever I can, whether it's a song, a poem, a prayer, or whatever, to be of service in that way. I'm just, it's like my bead and yarn painting. Sometimes a few beads or a few inches of yarn just make me cry because I'm living in this moment where it's so, all of it's spontaneous. And it's striking me with such vivid blessedness that I'm really thankful. I'm very humbled by the process. Sometimes I think I told you I've got about 11,000 notes in my phone. And I call my
Yeah.
bed constant creation. I'm literally living a life of constant creation. And I now sometimes want to make sure that I'm doing all I'm supposed to be doing, that I'm doing enough. And my beloved Barbara used to tell me, she's, Louis, you've been so patient. You've gone through so many trials and tribulations, but you've never let any of it deter you or slow you down. And I still hear her because she kept telling me, Louis, there's going to be a time when you're going to be so busy.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry, just let it be, let it be, let it be. And I feel that time is fast approaching.
I feel that time is fast approaching for all of us that are light workers that are here and have decided to be here at this time. I feel like it's just the beginning. And and when it hits, we're all there's enough work for all of us to engage and to make that ripple effect. Really, really make that ripple effect.
Well, I'm thankful for Priscilla, David, introduced me to that Mystic Minds Network, and through that cosmic stepping stone and invisible breadcrumb
Yeah.
stream of dominoes dancing in sacred geometric patterns, fractal flowing. We are here, golden liquid love light glowing, and it's all so beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Please tell our audience how they can reach you if they want to reach out or check out your website.
My website is www.constantcreation.org. Constant is CONSTANT, creation, CREATION. My email is jahecology@gmail.com. Jahecology, JAHCOLOGY @gmail.com.
Louis Virie Blanche, what a delight it was to have you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your heart. And if you like this episode, please subscribe to us. Please do share, 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 because our stories touch the hearts of many. And somebody out there wants to live their life a different way and they just don't know how. And they will feel inspired by these stories.
Mm.
So thank you, Louis, for being with us.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as I close our last session, I say, blessed be the mother, daughter, sister, lover, warrior, priestess, goddess, friend in you. Bless you.
And thank you
Thank you.
from our heart, bottom of my heart. So this has been another episode of The Infinite Way, where spirituality meets humanity. I hope you'll join us next time. Take care for now. Bye-bye.
Bye.